I should have known that my marriage would end when she insisted on splitting the bill on the first date. Welcome to Friday Fallacy. This week we're looking at the retrospective determinism fallacy. The retrospective determinism fallacy is assuming that an event was inevitable simply because it happened. That is, rather than make a case for its inevitability, instead it is assumed on poor evidence. This is not a sound way of arguing, as an event actually occurring is necessary for it to have been inevitable, but not sufficient. That Hitler rose to power and caused World War II doesn't mean that World War II was actually inevitable. That Julius Caesar was assassinated was not inevitable from him being a dictator. Some examples of the retrospective determination fallacy. Obama's victory in 2008 was always going to happen. America wanted change. The global financial crisis was predicted by many people, but we just didn't listen. We talk about Pearl Harbor as if we couldn't have seen it coming, but there were many signs. Social research is all just common sense. None of the research is surprising. Not all claims of inevitability are the retrospective determination fallacy. The fallacy occurs when the inevitability of some event is argued solely from its having occurred. That is, it is not fallacious to claim that something was bound to happen if you can actually establish that circumstances could not have been sufficiently different so as to prevent it from happening. For example, suppose that your favourite sports team manages an upset victory over a better credentialed team. Many people will subsequently claim that this, in hindsight, was always going to happen. That's the retrospective determination fallacy. To avoid the fallacy, you would need to provide reasons why your team was actually likely to have won and that such factors were known before the match. The retrospective determination fallacy often occurs when the outcome of a random event is particularly skewed one way. For example, when a political candidate scores an emphatic victory, we are more likely to see this as having been inevitable, even when beforehand we were far less than certain. Sports teams winning by wide margins or significant historical events are also more likely to seem completely predictable in retrospect. And while in hindsight we may well be able to pick out signs that pointed to these events, generally such signs were amongst plenty of other hints suggesting other outcomes. So before September 11, there was some intelligence suggesting a plot to hijack airliners. But this was swamped by the many other possible threats that also had weak indications. It is only because such a shocking event actually occurred that we can retrospectively pick out particular pieces of intelligence as important and others as not. There is a kind of historical analysis that can seem to invoke this fallacy. A common view of history is that events arise out of the prevailing social conditions and that the actual people involved are somewhat unimportant. For example, it is sometimes argued that if Hitler had not have existed, then the situation in Germany was such that someone else would have played much the same role in German nationalism, and that history would have unfolded much the same. These historical arguments can be valid, but they do need to be based in solid analysis. For example, it would not be fallacious if you could establish that Hitler himself was not particularly unusual, or that he had merely served as a figurehead for a broader movement. But to claim that German nationalism was inevitable without such analysis is to commit the retrospective determination fallacy. In conclusion, the retrospective determination fallacy is when an event is assumed to have been inevitable simply because it occurred. Until next time, keep your fallacies to yourself.